All right, well, it's good to see everybody that's studying here with us tonight, and everybody that's going to be watching online. We're glad that you are tuned in tonight. We're starting the second part of our Love Community Team training track. The first section of this track, we were talking about evangelism. This second part, we're going to be talking about cross-cultural engagement and what it means to do missions. And so this is going to be very helpful for our Love Community teams as we're going out into the community trying to reach different people groups and different places around our community as we think about how to be a missionary in our city. And then it'll also be helpful when we're going overseas as well to work with the various partnerships that we have. Our church has a goal to adopt an unreached people group on every continent, and so as we go to try and reach these various people groups, this training will be helpful for that as we go. So we've got a lot of material that we're going to go through, and this is material that comes from our International Mission Board. This training is really specific to the Americas peoples affinity groups, which would be the indigenous peoples of the Americas, North and South America. But the principles can be applied on every continent, right? And so a lot of the examples that they'll give you are specific to the Americas, and we've adopted an unreached people group in Mexico, the I people, and all the stuff that we're talking about here will be fitting for that work especially. So as we go through this, we've got a lot of material that we're going to cover over the next 5 weeks that's going to do this missions training part. So as we start tonight, we're going to talk about focusing on people who are without hope, right? So lostness is what's driving what we're doing. We believe that everybody needs to have a relationship with Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And that's what's going to push us to go to the ends of the earth, to go across the street to our neighbor, to share Jesus with them. And the things that we're doing as a church here in Knoxville and around the world can either help that and accelerate that, or it can be a hindrance to that, depending on how we engage folks in evangelism and church planting. So we need to follow biblical models for missions. And unfortunately, throughout the years, there's been some bad models for missions, and then there's been some more faithful models for missions. And so we obviously want to try to be faithful to what we see in the scriptures with regard to missions. And so we'll talk about some of those things tonight. And the first time you hear it, you go, wow, I never really thought about that, but it makes sense. I never thought about what sort of impact that might have in some of these countries as you do things. And so as we're going, we're remembering it's not about us. It's about God, right? It's about bringing glory to the Lord. It's about proclaiming the gospel of Christ. And then it's about them. It's about, Jesus said, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. And so we're trying to go out to lost people to share the gospel with them. And so if we want to see the Great Commission, Matthew 28, fulfilled, as we see in Revelation 7, when all the people from every tribe and tongue and nation is gathered around the throne, then we have to answer some questions. Are our priorities the same as God's? Are the things that are important to God important to us? Are we doing everything we can to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to hear and understand and respond to the gospel? Are we going all in on trying to make sure that people get to hear Jesus? And then impact. What will be the impact of our mission strategies and projects on the people that we're ministering to? And so these are the sort of questions that you have to use to assess what we're doing as a church in trying to reach folks with the gospel. So why do we need to take the gospel to all the nations? Why is that important? Well, Romans 1:20 tells us that men are without excuse, that all of us, that God has put His word in our heart that we're without excuse. 2 Peter 3:9 says that He wishes that none would perish, but all would come to repentance. So God desires for all people to have a relationship with Him. In Matthew 28, the Great Commission, He commands us to go and make disciples. And so we see that if you're lost, it means that you are separated from God, you're without Christ, and that you have no hope. There's good news and there's bad news about the gospel. The good news is that you can be forgiven of your sins, you can have salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. The bad news is if you don't put your faith in Christ as your Savior, that you spend eternity in hell. John 3:16, God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whosoever, right, would believe in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. And so, but if you don't believe that, then you'll be condemned. So there are people that are on their way to hell because they don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. Millions, in fact, billions are lost around the world. So this gives us a little graph that explains sort of the temperature of the world. There's about 28% who are non-Christians that have little or no access to the gospel. That's 1.8 billion people, little to no access to the gospel. There are about 39% non-Christians that have some access to the gospel. That's 2.5 billion people. There's about 23% that would be labeled as cultural Christianity. They say they're Christians, which means my dad was a Christian, my granddad was a Christian, or I'm from America. That's what it means to them, is when they say I'm a Christian. When we were in Central Asia, they thought that everybody from America was Christians. When we were talking to them, they said, well, I was born here, I'm a Muslim. You're born in America, you're a Christian. And I said, no, we're not born as Christians. We choose to be Christians. And so it was a time to be able to share the gospel with them. And then about 10%, or 640 million, are evangelical, Bible-believing Christians. And of that 640 million, you see about 50 million are Baptists. And so you see the parenthesis there around the top three. Those are lost people there, right? So you add those numbers up, that's 90%, about 90% of the world. So there's some terms that I want us to become familiar with. I use these terms a lot when I'm preaching and teaching, like a people group. A people group is the largest group that the gospel can flow without encountering significant barriers. And so a people group would be a group of people that maybe share a common language, maybe a common ethnicity, a common faith system. That's what would designate them as a people group. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to live in the same place. People groups can be scattered around the world, but a lot of times they are centrally located in a specific place. We use the term unreached. Unreached, according to missiologists, means that they're less than 2% evangelical Christian. So to show you how low the bar is, if they're 3% evangelical Christian, they call that a reached population. Okay, so to be, and I don't think any of us would say a population that's 3% Christian is reached, right? But that's how low the bar is. So 2%, less than 2% is unreached. Unengaged means that there's not any church or organization that's trying to start churches among a people group. And so you see there's about 11,600 people groups in the world. About half of those, 6,750, are unreached, which is so that about half of those are remember, less than 2% Christian. And of those, about 3,684 are unengaged. About half of the unreached groups are unengaged. Nobody's even working with them or trying. And then you see there 2,830 have no believers among those people groups. So these are some startling statistics. as we think about lostness around the world. So, just statistically speaking, of every 1,000 people alive today, 100 are evangelical Christians, 230 are cultural Christians, 390 have limited gospel access, 280 have no gospel access. So about 900 are lost out of every 1,000 people alive today. So this is just statistics. Every minute, 90 people die and go to hell. Every hour, 5,400 people. Every day, 130,000 people. Every week, from one Sunday to the next, 907,000 people go to hell. So almost 1 million people enter hell every week around the world. So you see why I get really fired up when I preach about missions and about us giving to missions, praying for missions, going on missions, sending people, because these numbers are awful. They're awful to even try to get your mind around this. So, did you know that more people in the world today have access to a bottle of Coke than they do to the gospel? All right, most of those people groups that we talked about are unengaged and unreached. They can get Coca-Colas. They probably have cell phones, most of them, but they don't have Jesus. There's still a lot of vast areas of the planet that are unreached with the gospel, and there are pockets of lostness even in the Americas affinity, where nobody's heard about Jesus, nobody's trusted in Jesus as salvation in the Americas, right? We think about the Americas, and I'm talking North and South America, as, hey, that's a lot of Christians there. That seems like there's, it's a reached area, but that's not the case. So among the Americas, there's about 1,025 people groups with a population of 550 million people. Unreached people groups, 690. So you see over half of the people groups in the Americas are unreached people groups. UUPGs would be unengaged, unreached people groups. So, right, remember, unengaged means no one's working with them, is 462. UUUPGs, that means uncontacted, unengaged, unreached people groups. So they've not even made contact with these groups, 38 groups. So there's a lot of lostness just in the Americas. And a lot of those are indigenous groups. So there's a lot of barriers to the gospel in this specific to the Americas. These would be more specific to the Americas. Of course, there's access. A lot of areas where there's limited or no access to the gospel. You got to have people that are willing to go. You got to have people that are willing to speak the gospel. There's a lot of places where there's a presence, but there's no proclamation of the gospel. Maybe there's Christians around, but they're not reaching people. The format of the gospel. We're going to talk about this as we go through these next sessions about literate cultures and oral cultures. That there are some cultures where, hey, if I could just get the Bible in their language and give it to them, that means nothing to them. Like maybe their culture doesn't have a written language. It's just something that they speak. And so we have to, and so our third part of this Love Community Team track is teaching us how to do storying. And it's for oral cultures. And so you're going to learn how to speak the gospel in those sort of formats. And then sometimes the gospel can be presented with cultural trappings, that we present the gospel in a way that the church has to look like the church in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the church in rural indigenous Mexico won't look like Wallace Memorial Baptist Church, right? And so, but a lot of times the way that we present it is it looks like this, and they go, well, we almost make it where you got to become like an American in order to become a Christian, and they go, well, I don't want all that. But if we would just give them Jesus, they would trust in Jesus. And then this is one that's really widespread in the Americas as a barrier, is syncretism. And what syncretism means is that you're trying to sync up two competing worldviews, right? And so they're mixing biblical truth with some of their indigenous traditions. So what happened specifically in the Americas is when the Spanish came to the New World and began to conquer a lot of these areas, they brought with them Catholicism, and they were conquering these peoples, and they were saying, "You're now Christians." They would baptize them and say, "You're Christians now." And what a lot of these indigenous cultures did was, "All right, that's fine. We'll accept that," and they would just blend it in with what they already believed. And so, Mary is the goddess of the earth, or Jesus is the sun god, and this, so they just kind of mixed it all together. And what you have now is a really diluted, distorted form of Christianity, even in places where it looks like maybe they are Christians and maybe they think that they're Christians. What they really believe is nothing like what the Bible teaches. And so you'll see that a lot in Mexico. They'll have a statue of Jesus in their house, but they'll put these hanging plants around them to ward off evil spirits and things like that. And so you see all this kind of mingling of things that take place. And so that's very common throughout the Americas. So that's what syncretism is. Like I said, it's mixing and matching these layers of beliefs together. So one of the things we need to ask ourselves is, how many people have heard the gospel because of me? Who am I telling about Jesus? Who's a part of the kingdom now? Who's part of the family now? Because I've shared with them and told them how they can be saved. The fields are white for harvest, and this is, I think, a really good way to think about it. The world's not a pancake; it's a waffle. Like if you have a pancake, you pour syrup on it, it's flat, just kind of covers the whole thing and flows off. But a waffle, you got to get it in every little square on the thing, and that's really what it's like as you begin to go through the Americas. There might be churches in this area, but then you go out 10 miles in the rural mountains, and they've never heard of this stuff before. And there's just a pocket there of people that have been isolated and separated from all of this for generations and generations, and don't know anything about it. So it's a lot like a waffle. So this is the first lesson. We're going to do 2 tonight. That's the first lesson on lostness. This next lesson, if I can see here, when it's connected, it gets small and I can't see it. There we go. This next lesson is teaching us about how some principles on thinking through strategies to reach people. Okay, so the first part was all about this is lostness. This is why this is important. This is why we're doing what we're doing, and we see the vastness of it. So let's start thinking about, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to engage people here in our city with Jesus on our Love Community teams. We're going to send teams out to these various parts of the world to share the gospel. What are some principles that's going to guide us? And so they call it the INR of missions. So these are some foundational things. We believe that lostness should impact all that we do. And so, we believe that people need to know Jesus. Everybody deserves the chance to hear the gospel and respond. And we want to emphasize reproducibility. That we want to train the people that we're engaging to be able to do this on their own, to do evangelism, do discipleship, to start churches. And that as these churches multiply, the Great Commission will expand. So if we're going to reach the world, we have to overcome 3 challenges. You got to get from lost to saved, right? That's the first step. get from saved to part of the church. And some people will get saved and there's not a church there, right? So you get from lost to saved, from saved to church, from church to starting other churches, from multiplying churches. And they think that last part might be the greatest challenge to reaching people from every tribe and tongue and nation, is getting from a church to multiplying churches. Even in the United States of America, where we have about 50,000 Southern Baptist churches, just Southern Baptist churches in the United States, about 50,000. If you went down and looked at those 50,000 Southern Baptist churches and said, how many of those churches are multiplying? How many of them are starting churches? How many of them are doing missions? How many of them even, you'd be shocked at how many didn't baptize a single person in a whole year. You'd be shocked of those 50,000. And so it's getting from saved to churches to multiplying churches if we're going to reach the whole world with the gospel. So we gotta move from just thinking about addition to thinking about multiplication. We want to. There's almost 1 million people that go to hell every single week. So we're not going to win by doing addition. We got to do multiplication to reach the world with the gospel. So if you're going to do that, you got to address these issues. Remember the INR: indigeneity, non-dependency, and reproducibility. Say those with me: indigeneity, non-dependency, and reproducibility. INR. Okay, so these are 3 things that are important when we think about doing missions. You want your work to be indigenous, non-dependent, and reproducible. So your plans are going through that funnel to develop your strategies that are going to lead to multiplying churches. So you see the picture here on the left. You might know what that is. Buckeye. Well, on the right, that's a banana. The folks from Florida know what those are. All right, so which one of those grows in Ohio? Buckeye, right? You try to plant bananas in Ohio, not going to do so great, right? Maybe for a couple months, and then the winter comes. So this is David talking about putting on Saul's armor in 1 Samuel. He says, I can't walk with these. I'm not used to them. This isn't mine. He says. Some other examples were like in Acts 17, where Paul finds an altar with the inscription to an unknown God. He says, what you're worshiping in ignorance, I want to proclaim to you. And so he's, in each of these contexts, they're speaking to people where they are in their culture. And so addressing worldview issues, when we say things, people hear them and understand them through their own cultural lenses. And so we need to understand about the culture that we're trying to reach. And so that's why, like with our Love Community teams, we say to them, when you first get your team started, if you're assigned to a people group or to a place, the first thing we want you to do is to strategize, to pray, to get to know about your people group or about your place, to know how they think, to know what's important in this location, what's the heart of this neighborhood, things like that, as you're trying to come up with a strategy of how to reach those people. So is this a literate culture? Is it an oral culture? That's important for your strategy. Are you using their heart language or their market language, right? And they call it a pigeon language. For example, it used to be Latin, not a long time ago, back in the Roman days. People would speak their local dialects, but they knew Latin because that's what they did their commerce in. Today, that language is really English in a lot of places around the world. They might speak Chinese or they might speak French, but they know some English so they can do business together. And a lot of these places that we're talking about in the Americas, Spanish will be that market language. They'll probably know Spanish, or at least some Spanish. Most of them will, but that might not be what their heart language is. When they're at home, sitting around their table for dinner, they might speak a dialect. What they're teaching their kids is a dialect, and so when you share the gospel with them, if it does make a difference if you're sharing it with them in a market language or in their heart language, for them to take it to heart. When we talk about syncretism, you got to think about true and false conversions. Just like I just gave you the example when the Catholic or when the Spanish came, they said, "You're all Catholic now." They all said, "Okay," And in the Americas, among a lot of these cultures, it's respectable or showing hospitality or kindness to agree with you, right? And so if they can see that you want them to, if you're sharing the gospel and they can tell you want them to believe this, they'll go, yes, because they want to please you. They want to make you, to make you happy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they believe it in their heart. It doesn't necessarily mean that they won't believe it, but they might not believe it yet, right? And so, there's syncretism that takes place there. They go, I'll just add that to everything else I'm doing. And then what does the church look like in this place? So those are questions that you gotta answer, local leaders and leadership development, as you're doing it. You want these things to be indigenous. You want it to look like the culture that you're trying to reach. So here's some challenges, right? I want you to think about this scenario when it has to do with being indigenous. There's a church mission team. They go on a vision trip to do a partnership in the Americas. First year, they say, all right, we're going to install windows and screens in the church sanctuary. Mosquitoes were really bad there. Year two, they're raising funds to send down air conditioning units so they can, have air. It's so hot down there. They said they don't have any hymnals or any, melody in their church's music, so we're going to send them a PowerPoint machine and a piano. We're a small church, but we can do this for our brothers in Rincon, Trasado. They challenged their church. So what are some of the challenges you think to making an indigenous church in this scenario?
They may not be able to run a PowerPoint.
They may not be able to run a PowerPoint. That's exactly right. That might be the first time they've ever seen a PowerPoint, right? How many of them you think have air conditioning at their houses? Probably none of them. How many of them you think have windows and screens at their houses? Probably none of them, right? And so what is this church done? They tried to make it like our church, right? They said, we'll just take our little church here in East Tennessee and we'll put it right here in the middle of wherever they're at, right? And so what we're communicating to them is, you're not doing church unless you do it like we do, right? That's what you're communicating to them. And so that's some indigenous challenges. All right. Non-dependent. That's the second. Remember, I is indigenous. The N is non-dependent. We want them to be non-dependent. So of all the challenges that missionaries face, the creation of unhealthy dependencies has done a whole lot more to slow the spread of the gospel than any other thing. This is what missionaries would tell us. Whether we want to admit it or not, we find ourselves at one time or another providing help that hurts. And that's a phrase I want you to think about. There's actually a whole book called When Helping Hurts that makes you think through a lot of these issues with dependency. Not everything that we do that we're trying to be helpful. It's the best of intentions, but it's not always good for the church in the long run, and for the work and the mission in the long run. So dependent means unable to exist or sustain oneself to act normally without the assistance or direction of another. That's what it means to be dependent on someone. So what causes unhealthy dependency in the missions? Assuming that money is the answer to all the problems, right? We can, as Americans, we can come into most of these countries in the Americas and we're very wealthy. Even though we might not be wealthy in America, we're very wealthy in most of these other countries. And so we can come with money and think that we can solve a lot of their problems. Ongoing giving to a small group of selected individuals that we're going to help out this group and give them some money. providing money for something that's a perceived need, but it's not an actual need. You know, we go, these kids don't have what our kids have. We need to give them this Xbox or whatever it is. You know, and I'm just being silly about the Xbox, but they need to have everything that our kids have. And no, they don't, you know. And so we create dependency. And then establishing a precedent at the outset of the work that's based on outside funding. So whatever you do at the beginning, that's what they're going to expect as you continue. And so you kind of set that pattern as you work with groups. And then unintentionally assuming that the national believers can't function on their own. They need us in order to do this. And the whole goal of all of these partnerships that we have, we're trying to adopt an Unreached People group on every continent, is that they don't need us in a few years. You want to go in, you want to see people win to the Lord, you want to start churches, you want to see those churches begin to multiply, and then we step out of the way and they do their thing. I mean, that's what you want to do, right? It's what you want to do as a parent too, but it doesn't always work that way. They move back in the basement or something, right? But the idea is that you want to train them up and then set them free to go. So what are some of the consequences of dependency? Steve Saint wrote in the book, The Radio Mission, when in the name of Christ's commission we do for indigenous believers what they can and should do for themselves, then we undermine the very church that God has sent us to plant. That we're undermining what we're trying to accomplish there. So what does it feel like? It can be financial paternalism, which is, you know, we kind of own this. A sense of helplessness, social separation. The outside support of a pastor can cause jealousies within the local community. That's something that can happen as a result of us supporting someone like that. And spiritual immaturity. A congregation is less motivated to obey Scripture when we're doing it for them, right? So that's what can happen with dependency. This is out of the Wall Street Journal in 2010. The op-ed said, to help Haiti, we need to end foreign aid. They said, for actual Haitians, just about every conceivable aid scheme beyond immediate humanitarian relief was going to lead to more poverty, more corruption, and less institutional capacity. What's happening is that all the help, like after the earthquake that happened, y'all remember that big earthquake that happened in Haiti? And about $1 billion came into Haiti after that. And they're not any better off now with $1 billion more, right? And so Haiti is one of the greatest examples of dependency in the world with missions, because it's close to the U.S. A lot of teams go there. I don't think anybody's ever flown into Haiti on a mission trip when they didn't see other mission teams in the airport. There's teams going in constantly in there, and they're just perpetuating dependency.
Corrupt politicians.
A lot of corrupt politicians that are lining their pockets. So here's an example of what this can look like. Okay, a lot of congregations don't believe they can be church until they have a building. Right? We got to have a building. We're not a church unless we have a building. And so in Mexico, for example, they have a lost population of about 100 million people. To double the current evangelization level, 6% to 12%, which would be a church for about every 500 people, they would need 200,000 churches to be built there. Okay, if it would cost you $7 billion at $35,000 a church, it would take you 2,000 years if you build 100 churches a year. Okay, so is that a good strategy? Right? No. So if church planting means we got to build a building for them to meet in, then we're never ever going to get very far in sharing the gospel. So these are dependency things. Giving in a healthy way. Ask God to give you guidance as you're working with your people group. Ask God to give you focus on the projects that are going to help the community, as opposed to maybe a person or a family. Something that's going to be a little bit more helpful for a community. with local resources and empowering the national partners to do the work, and then avoiding ongoing financial commitments to people. So there we go. So here's another dependency challenge, okay? There's a recent trip. They were working with a bivocational pastor down there. They went door to door sharing the gospel. One morning, the local pastor showed up about 4 hours late. His bus was broken down. He couldn't afford a taxi. And they discovered that the pastor was taking time off of work with no pay to be able to participate. And so he wouldn't have enough money to pay his rent that month. So after they got home, they meet with the pastor and missions committee at their church, and they decide they're going to give $100 a month to supplement the income of the national pastor so that he's going to be able to spend more time doing ministry. And one member says, I'm going to give him one of my old cars so he'll have more reliable transportation. So what do you think about that scenario?
Well, you're going to be giving that $100 forever.
You're going to give that $100 forever, right? That's never going to go away.
And that car's going to eventually grow old and break down and won't have it anymore, so then you have to give him another.
Then you're going to have to give him another car. Yep. Our old car, what do you think our old car looks like down there? Looks like a brand new car, right? Looks like a Cadillac down there, right? So what you've now got a pastor that's trying to reach people that are probably poor just like he is compared to our standards, who's getting paid $100 a month, which is a lot, and is driving around in a nice car. And so what do you think the people think now about this pastor and about Christianity? You know, some of them might say, hey, I'd like to be a Christian. Maybe they'll send me money.
That's life now.
Yeah. So this is a tough scenario because you feel for this guy, right? Well, I've worked with missionaries just like this before in the past that would be interpreters for us, and they were taken off of work. We would usually give them money as their, like a per diem, as they're translating for us because they're doing work, but they were taken off of jobs to come and work with us. And you go, whoa, we just need to give him more money, and he could do this all the time, you know, or whatever. But that's not really helping with the mission. All right. So INR, right? First one was you want it to be indigenous. The N was you want it to be non-dependent. And the R, you want it to be reproducible. All right? So don't do for others what they can and should do for themselves. All right? We want to train people to do what they can do, what they currently can't do. So when we do this, we're communicating these things. We're communicating to them. You can't do it like we can do it. Even if you could do it, we can do it better. And we don't believe you're smart enough to do this. That's what we're unintentionally maybe communicating to folks, to national partners, when we're doing the work for them. So I love it when we go on mission trips and I'm spending time with the local pastors, learning from them and trying to help train them, right? I always learn so much from spending time with them, but also trying to help train them to think about some of these things as they're going out, because they might not have access to, you know, some Bible resources or things like that. And so we try to help do some training with them. And you want that to be reproducible, what they can take it and go teach other people. And that our way is the best way. So 2 Timothy 2:2, this is a verse that we use when we talk about our discipleship groups here, our D groups of the church, where Paul says, things you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also, right? So you have Paul who's entrusting to faith the things that you have heard, right? So Paul to Timothy. Entrust these to faithful men. So Timothy's entrusting to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So you see 4 generations there of reproduction taking place. So if we want to make it reproducible, little goes a long way. If you're going to go use materials with people, you know, sometimes we want to bring things there to use. Use things that they can get. If you go on Amazon and order it, maybe they got a Spanish version. So you got to use things that they can get their hands on. Train using the MAWL process. So MAWL stands for model, assist, watch, and leave. So it begins by modeling it. Say watch what I'm doing, and then assist is I'm going to help you to do it, and then watch is I'm going to watch you do it now, and then leave is you're doing it. I'm gone. Okay, and so that's what you want to try to do. So I say we're going to maul you. Okay, so you want to model, assist, watch, leave, and I do this with people when we do share the gospel. People that never shared the gospel before, I say just come with me, and we'll go do it. And I model it. They watch me do it. And I say, all right, you're up this time, and then I'll assist and help them do it. And then the next time I go, all right, you're up, and I stand back like this, and watch them do it. And then I say, all right, you go to that house, and I'll go to this house. And they're on their own then. So that's what you want to do for our national partners as well. Don't do anything alone, which is what I just mentioned. You're always showing people how you're doing it. And then you're asking, what does the Bible say? That's the most important thing, right? Not how do we do it, but what does the Bible say? And then what do they need to do in order to do what they should do? What are the things that they need? And can they do this after we're gone? A lot of mission trips from American churches are, we're going to go in and do this big thing for you. We're going to go in and do this huge tent revival, or we're going to go in and we're going to do this, we're going to go and do that. We're going to go build this for you. Can they do it after we're gone? Right? That's the question. Because the next week we're gone, and what are they going to do then? So we want it to be reproducible. Here's a challenge. Okay, the U.S. volunteer team, they want to bring a big revival experience to an indigenous village. So they raise funds, they ship a large tent, sound equipment, wireless headset mics, PowerPoint equipment. They rent 3 vans at the airport to transport the team and nationals to a remote landing strip where the equipment was flown in to the interior to be transported by canoes. There was a great delay getting to the village because it took several canoe trips to get everything delivered. But the revival was a great success. Many people accepted Christ. The local pastors asked the U.S. church to help them get a tent and equipment so they can do this with nationals in other villages. Is there a reproducibility challenge in this situation?
Yeah, because they're not going to have all this stuff down at their local Walmart.
Right. Well, they don't have a local Walmart, right? Yeah. So they don't. Yeah. They don't have all that stuff, and frankly, they don't need all that stuff, right? They don't need it to do this.
I couldn't help but wonder if they even had electricity to run on.
Yeah, they probably don't. And so what we have done is we've created a model for them that they can't do, that they can't reproduce. And what we've shown them is this is if you want to reach people, this is what you got to do. And they go, well, we can't do that, so we can't reach people. And so they don't do anything. So these are the first two sessions. The first one was about lostness. The second one was about principles that are going to guide mission strategies. The I, which was for indigenous, the N, which is for non-dependent, and the R, which was for reproducible. Right. So tune in next week, and we'll continue the conversation when we talk about how to do Love Community teams.